McKeel, thanks so much for joining us today. So tell us about what the classic car market looks like right now.
Well, the market's been really strong this year when everybody wasn't quite sure what was going to happen with all the uncertainty and tariffs and everything we saw in the spring. You know, we kind of charged through summer and we saw a lot of great sale activity, both on the kind of live auction side, digital side, private transactions. It's been a good, solid year in the car market.
Does it feel like that strength will carry over into next year?
Yeah, there's nothing indicating that it would change. And one of the things that we've seen is a lot of momentum on the private side. You know, people point so much to public auctions that, you know, we're seeing a lot of private transactions take place of very significant cars of kind of all ages. So it's, you know, so far so good, and, you know, looking forward to getting into 2026.
And when we look at the auction market and the private market, what's hot right now, what's not?
Well, the biggest story of 2025 was this supercar segment. We can't even state it enough. You and I have chatted about it a few times. Supercars are these, you know, super rare variants of big brands like that we know about. So Ferraris and Lamborghinis and, you know, some Porsches and, you know, even more exotic Pagani's and Koenigsegg's, this sort of thing. So one of the stats that I think is really interesting is that of our big collectors, what we call our private clients, 80% of the vehicles they bought and added to their collections were supercars.
And when you say supercars, is that like 90s and later? Or?
Yes, 90s and later cars, you know, so it could be a Ferrari F40, it could be a McLaren F1, it could be something like that, but it's, you know, they're not adding 50s and 60s era cars to their collections. They're picking this time to say, look, I don't want to be left without a few of these things in my collection. And the only other time we've ever seen that was in the, you know, early 2000s, in the run-up of the muscle car era, where very well-heeled collectors were adding muscle cars very different than their normal collection. Now that same group of collectors is adding supercars.
So as a market indicator or as an economic indicator, what does that tell you? That we now have this burst of a new class of cars taking the lead?
Yeah, and part of it is new manufacturers, or, you know, sometimes these really boutique-y manufacturers are really delivering these.
Pagani, Koenigsegg.
Yeah, multi-million-dollar cars, and people are buying them as fast as they can possibly get them. So it's interesting. I'm not sure it was taken as seriously a few years ago, but now they've really come to, you know, really come into their own. Another interesting fact, so look at Bugatti. We've talked about Bugattis before, you and I. Not everybody took cars like the Bugatti Veyron that seriously. And now they're setting all these new kind of secondary sales records. There was a record set out in Las Vegas over Halloween weekend. They actually had 50 Veyrons collected for the show at the Wynn Concours d'Elegance. So, you know, these are real. They're being added to collections by very serious collectors who are taking them seriously. And it's fun to watch. It's really fun to see.
And it's that younger generation that's driving that. So tell us what you're seeing generationally in the classic car market.
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest thing I'm asked is, what are the next generations thinking about cars, and what are they interested in? And, you know, we know forever that the baby boomer generation were the biggest collectors, I'm sure, in the art scene and
are the baby boomers selling, not adding? What are they doing?
So the baby boomers are generally, they as they age, they tend to simplify their lives.
Okay.
So, you know, they're taking great big car collections, they sell a few down, maybe they buy one or two along the way, but they're definitely simplifying their lives. So we're now talking about Gen Xers, the Gen Y or millennials, and then the Gen Zers even, you know, who are the Gran Turismo generation. They're starting to buy. And, you know, the more money they make, they tend to buy up in each type of segment of car along the way.
And that younger generation, we're talking Gen X, millennials, Gen Zers. Do you think that generation is going to continue to sort of come into the market more? Do you feel like that growth has already played out, or do you see more ahead, especially as it relates to the great wealth transfer?
Well, the great wealth transfer is going to be a big piece of it, right? I mean, I think the estimates are something like $4 trillion a year or something like that is about to start changing hands. And some of that will be cars. Some of it's going to be real estate, it's going to be art, it's going to be cars. They're going to be gaining, you know, these cars and have to decide do they want to keep it, you know, do they want to put it in a garage, do they want to keep, you know, that part of their family's life alive, do they want to sell them. We are already seeing that, you know, they're taking a strong interest in this. So I don't think it's played out at all. I think it's really just beginning. But it's a different type of car they're largely interested in.
And I remember about probably 10 years ago, you and I were in Pebble Beach, and you were saying, we've got Uber now, we've got generations of guys that and women that just maybe aren't interested in cars. Maybe the whole business and world of collecting cars will fall off a cliff. It didn't. I mean, in fact, it went the other direction. What is your main worry as it relates to, you're the largest insurer of classic cars. You also have the largest platform for enthusiasts and collectors. What is your worry about the growth of that market? What's going to keep it growing in the future? Is there a concern?
Well, there are headwinds and tailwinds out. It's like some sort of cross chop in all of these things. The fact that so many of these luxury car makers continue to build cars in greater and greater number and sell them, it seems quite easily. So you think Ferrari, you think Porsche, you think of all of them, they just seem to be setting record sales numbers every year. And remember when some of these car companies not that long ago, they were making single digit 100 cars.
Yeah.
Now Ferrari's making 13 or 14,000. Lamborghini's selling 9,000 cars. Porsche's selling tens of thousands of 911s. That's the future of what people will be buying, and they'll be collecting, and they'll hang on to them. So we like that as kind of the tailwind,
right.
The momentum that we have going.
Supply.
Of course, the supply is large, and people feel pretty flush, like the consumer's in pretty good shape, even though not every single consumer does. So we think that there's good, solid momentum there. And then you get sort of some of these other types of segments coming in, trucks, SUVs, vintage versions of those, more and more of these so-called resto mods where people take an old car and they restore it kind of with new specifications. That's fun. That's like the new hot rodder of today.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of ways that people can play in this space. Now, the other things that are interesting is as we've talked about this through the years, is urbanization. Prior to COVID, it was rapid urbanization. Young people were moving into cities because that's where you network and that's where you discover yourself. During COVID, everybody was moving out of cities and buying cars and going camping and hiking and all the stuff that we did. So how will that play out as a headwind or tailwind? That's something that we're looking at because, if you live in Manhattan, it's not a great driving city. Outside of Manhattan, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have the bull market list, which you just published. And the idea there, these are cars that are great value, not too expensive to maintain, but really fun. And after all, that is the point of collecting cars, is it's fun, right?
Yes,
They're fun to look at. So tell us a little bit about the cars that we have here today.
Well, there are 11 cars on the list this year, and they range from iconic cars like the Porsche Carrera GT, which represents kind of the high water mark. And then on the list this year, we have kind of 4 cars that we kind of call driver cars. So, and these are, again, kind of affordable, but emerging in the data. So Corvette Z06, of course, there are 8 generations of Corvettes. And this is an affordable version. Two variants ago. Now we're up to the C8, and this is Z06. So
and
this is
super powerful
hybrid.
Car. That's
super
high.
Yeah.
That's a V8. That's a strong engine.
It's a handful to drive these sort of thing. Mazda Miata. This is the Series 2. So maybe it's a slightly more developed variant than the earliest generation. But again, 1.2 million of these things on the road. And they're just, incredibly reliable.
And you could get that car for roughly how much, do you think?
Today? 15, 17,000, somewhere in there.
And a lot of fun on the road and the track for $15,000, $20,000.
Well, almost every track driver out there wants to really learn to drive. They start at one of these. And but if you just want to drive it on a sunny afternoon or not. Now, the Alfa Romeo is an interesting example. So the GTV, not everybody knows about these. But these are cars that, by the way, are new in the 60s. These were $4,000 cars, and now they're 120, 130,000. They're super cool looking. You see a lot of these like this with the cool racing stripes on it. And
because they won a lot of rallies back in the day.
Well, exactly. And they're kind of a real aficionado car. It's not a Ferrari, but it's Italian styling. I think they just have fantastic looks. And so also on the list of the European side is we have the E60 BMW M5. So 3 Series BMWs have been, they're super popular for that kind of person trying to get into it. But the M5 has always been that kind of, that's kind of the flagship. So what's cool about that one this year, the E60, is there are about 8,000 delivered in the United States. And it's V10, they made a manual transmission. A lot of them are getting imported back to Europe because the Europeans were so in love with them, they want to get them back.
Oh, that's
so you see some of that. Now trucks, we have a really cool Chevrolet this year, with a great big engine in it. We have a Dodge Ram Charger, which was kind of like Dodge's answer to the Bronco. Super awesome. And it's a really nice list of cars that people can get into, and the data is showing that younger people are starting to buy these things.
And whether it's within that supercar category or outside it, when you look at the data and you look at another sleeper car that you're starting to see, like, nobody took it seriously, suddenly you're starting to see some data. Are there any other models out there or types of cars that you would add to your sort of sleeper list that maybe in 2 or 3 years, if you're a collector, you might do well to buy today?
Well, you know, the one brand that has always been, I think, a through line in the last decade that's been on the rise is Porsche 911s. Almost every generation of Porsche 911 has had fans of, you know, the various variants. It's been amazing to see the strength of those.
And you see that continuing?
Oh, we see that continuing. I mean, Porsches are just great cars. They're kind of bulletproof for especially a first-time collector to get into. And if you're careful in the buy, you can still get really good deals there. On the American car side, again, I think there are some of these, you know, sort of mid-series Corvettes that are a really good opportunity. A slightly lower price point, Camaro on the Chevrolet side, and of course Mustangs. You know, there were just incredible Mustangs, great performance variants. I love some of the Shelby Mustangs. I think you can get some great deals and have a lot of fun with that.
And within Mustangs, a lot of variety between model years and eras, so
yes,
lots to collect there. And finally, I know you're a great student of broader markets. You look at the stock market, you look at the art market, you look at all these things. I know that classic cars, like the art market, it's its own thing. It's not closely correlated to anything. But what other parts of the market or parts of the economy do you watch as one input into the classic car market or close correlation?
Yeah, well, I think, look, the strength that we've seen in the market this year is a lot of people feeling pretty good about their personal balance sheets. If they can log into their account and see that, you know, the portfolio is doing okay, you know, maybe interest rates are still a little high, but I'm going to go for it. I want to buy that car. So I think what we're seeing strength-wise, it's that kind of personal feeling of strength. You know, yes, tariffs have created a lot of uncertainty, but so far it's not been totally catastrophic. So people, I think, are feeling that strength to be able to go out there and make those purchases. A couple years ago, I was looking more at the transactional side of the financial world, which was, you know, private equity exits and some of the cryptocurrency plays. Like, we don't see as much of that right now.
Right.
And at the high end, you know, the space that you and I talk about, it's trophy hunting. You know, it's when the older generation sells something truly great, you get one chance to get it. Yeah. So you have to run out there and take a run at it and hope you add it to your collection.
So if stocks continue to do well next year, that will be one tailwind for this market.
That would be a tailwind. That would be a tailwind. But we're going to watch the rest of it, you know, the effect of tariffs. Tariffs have a little bit more of an effect on new cars, newer, you know, some of those higher performance supercars.
15% on
and a little less,
cars.
A little less on older cars, but even that's kind of hard to figure out what that is. And of course, we'll be watching interest rates. But, you know, with the recent cut, so far so good there.
Great. McKeel, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you. Happy holidays.
Thank you.